welcome back to another episode of the House to Home podcast. My name is Grace Youngson, and as always, I'm joined by Joseph Kohm. And this podcast is brought to you by Family Policy Alliance Foundation. Today, we're super excited because we have a very special guest joining us once again. Sophia Lorey, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited.
Yes, of course. Sophia is the outreach director at California Family Council, and she's also a former college athlete. And that is especially pertinent to our discussion today, which is really around some of the most recent tensions on the Saves Girls Sports Initiative, especially in California. So we're really excited to bring you the latest updates on this. And so without further ado, Joseph, would you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I'm going to get Sophia to talk about it because she's our resident expert and advocate on the ground there working for California Family Council, one of our great 40 plus state family policy councils around the country that we are honored to host an alliance with. So Sophia, as always, it's great to have you back on. And I want to get into this with you because there's a lot to talk about. As Grace said, there's been a lot of tension around the issue of saving girls' sports in California recently, particularly with the governing body for amateur interscholastic sports in California, which goes by CIF. So over the last 6 months, there's just been a lot of drama with this, and we want you to tell our audience about it. So maybe we start from at least sort of the beginning. What is CIF, and how did this issue really start to get going a few months ago toward the beginning of the year?
Absolutely. So CIF, the California Interscholastic Federation, they are the governing body of high school sports here in the state of California. And so they basically oversee what teams play what and how everything lines together. But that also means they're put in charge of some of the policies in place. And they have put a policy in place that has been in since 2013, which is allowing people to play sports, to use restrooms and locker rooms at the high school level based off of your gender identity and not off of your sex. And they did this right after California passed a state law, AB 1266 in 2013, that stated the same thing. CIF then adopted that into their bylaws and went as far to put out a gender identity toolkit that gets passed out to all the schools, all the athletic directors, and all the coaches. And it's really disturbing to read through this toolkit. It dives into how to best onboard a trans-identified athlete. That's what their thing says. It's basically how to best onboard a male athlete into female athletics. It goes as far as saying to enlist the captain of the team to make sure the male athlete feels comfortable on the female team and the female locker room and the female restroom. And it's really disturbing to see that not only did they just say, oh, we're following state law, but they put it into their own bylaws and then put out an entire toolkit for how schools can adopt this ideology.
Yeah, this is wild to me, Sophia, because the state passed this law in 2013, and CIF follows with their policy to put in line with it in 2013. And the law is basically establishing at state law gender identity. And most people, at least the way we talk to our supporters, FPA was one of the early groups involved in combating the rise of gender identity and gender ideology on family life. We wrote the first model Help Not Harm law back in 2017. There were only a few other people and groups talking about it back then. Our friends at Heritage Foundation were starting to talk about it. Ryan Anderson, of course, wrote When Harry Became Sally back then and got blacklisted on Amazon for it. But we were all called kind of oddballs back then we thought we were ahead of the curve at that point. You're telling me even 4 years before that, the state of California passes a law that explicitly creates a conflict between California state law and Title IX of the Federal Civil Rights Code, which is very clear that men are men and women are women in the traditional way we've always understood that. So is that the conflict of laws that's been set up here that it sounds like it could be confusing to people in California?
Absolutely. A lot of Californians, when they reach out to CIF, when they are trying to figure out why is there a male athlete in my daughter's locker room? Why is my daughter having to compete against a male athlete? Then they start doing some deep diving, trying to figure it out. And all of a sudden they see, okay, well, CIF's just following state law. So I guess that's the law of the land in California. And like you said, we do have Title IX. And so when we have Title IX that's federally put in place, it does supersede the state law. So it shows that California, for the past 12 years, has been going directly against this federal ruling. It only took
Mm.
the time of actual athletes then onboarding into female athletics. So we see those males going in there. We saw it happening. We're seeing the girls lose titles, the girls changing in their cars because there's a male athlete watching them change at the high school level in their locker room. For people to bring attention and awareness to this, for the federal government to step in, it also took an administration that has made it clear they're going to stand with Title IX, for there to now be awareness about what's happening in California and for there to finally be some pushback.
Yeah, we're thankful to the current presidential administration for their defense of Title IX and the traditional understanding of women's rights in Title IX, particularly in sports. But Sophia, so why don't you tell us about what has this administration been doing with its Office of Civil Rights, its Department of Education? How are they combating this in California, and what's been the reception there from CIF in California?
Yeah, so we received an announcement that the US Department of Education, their Office of Civil Rights, so the OCR, was going to do an investigation into California and into Title IX in California with CIF, basically to see, are there actual male athletes in the female athletics programs? And we all knew the answer was yes, because we've seen it firsthand here in California. It's not just happening in one area, it's happening up and down the state, from the junior high level to the collegiate level. And so we were so excited to see that the OCR put out a report that they did find that CIF and the California Department of Ed are both violating Title IX, which was great news because we needed the federal government to step in to protect Title IX. I mean, Title IX have had in place for 53 years. And before Title IX was in place, we saw across the nation about 220 to 290,000 female athletes at the high school level. After Title IX, we're now at 3 million. Title IX is extremely important for female athletics, for females to be able to go out on the sports field, to learn so many skills from sports. And so it was really disturbing to watch California violate it and get away with it. So when they announced this just a few days ago, they said, we're going to give both CIF and the California Department of Ed 10 days to choose to follow Title IX. All they had to do was sign off on this proposition that was handed to them by the OCR that simply said, you have 10 days to follow Title IX. Make sure you make sports back to being sex-based. So males on the boys' teams, females on the girls' teams. Nothing new, nothing crazy, something we've been doing for a long time now. And my favorite part of this little proposition they handed over was that it did say that they were then going to have to reinstate all of the titles and all of the records to female athletes that have been broken by male athletes, which I literally got a text from a current high school female athlete that day saying, so if they signed this, does that mean I get my first place back? And it broke my heart because I did have to tell her, yes, that's what it means, but we aren't expecting them to agree to this. And so
Yeah.
girls are looking for them to do this. So they were given the 10 days and we're told, if you don't choose to do this within 10 days, we will send the US Department of Justice, so the DOJ, after California. Well, just the other day, we had the 10 days up and we saw a letter from both the California Department of Ed and CIF saying they respectfully disagree with this proposition. Let's walk through what that means on the most basic level. CIF and the California Department of Ed are saying that they do not agree that females should have their rights, safety, and fairness to athletics, but also to restrooms and locker rooms. They've made it clear that they're going to be okay with and die on the hill of allowing males into girls' athletics, expose male genitalia in high school girl locker rooms, because that is what is happening. And they're going to allow girls to continue to be put at risk of being injured due to a male. That's what the California leadership was okay with. And when I heard that news, I wasn't shocked because we've been seeing the route they've been going down. I was disappointed to be a Californian that day because of the California leadership, but I am not disheartened. I'm not hopeless. I know there's plenty of people standing up and fighting for what's right in California. Again, we have a federal administration that's looking to do what's right to protect female athletics. And so My message to the girls that day was, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And I'm heartbroken for all of you guys, but we're not giving up. We're going to continue to push back, and we'll die on the hill of making sure that female athletics in California are protected once again.
So on that opposition, I want to give Grace a minute to ask you about that. I just have a quick follow up because I know part of the current presidential administration's negotiating tactics and trying to get CIF to comply with basic Title IX civil rights law has been to threaten to withhold federal funding. So Sophia, just briefly tell us what's the dollar figure that they are threatening to withhold from California, and then what would the loss of that money potentially mean for all California students who participate in athletics?
Yeah, so right now we're hearing from different California attorneys that that dollar figure could be up to $8 billion of federal funding being lost for California, which was going to directly impact the education system. So, yes, this does affect every single child that is in school here in California. And the sad part is we are going to see the California leadership twist and turn this. And they are going to say that it is the presidential administration that is pulling these funds and leaving California students high and dry. That is not the case. It is the California leadership that is saying that they care more about confused boys in girls' locker rooms and girls' sports teams than following federal ruling. And because they won't follow that federal ruling, Title IX and the Title IX, the funding will be pulled. It's that simple. It's not the fault of the presidential administration. It is the fault of California leadership in this situation. Again, they are going to try and twist and turn this, but it's simple. This isn't something California just has to do. It's something every state has to do is follow this federal ruling. And when they choose not to, there is consequences.
I think what you just mentioned, Sophia, about specifically that dollar amount and the knock-on effects of that would be so huge. It really, really shows the heart behind all of this, and that it really is extremely anti-woman. And I just can't imagine how girls must feel in California knowing that their government doesn't really care about them and their success. This is maybe a little bit off topic, but I know you mentioned a girl who had texted you the other day, asking you specifically about whether she would get her medal now. Could you maybe share one other little story with us of girls you've come into contact with and what that kind of looks like? And also share with us a little bit about what happened to you at the state track and field championships that actually led you from being asked to leave. Can you share with us about that?
Absolutely. So we've been seeing again stories up and down the state of California of girls being impacted mentally, physically, losing scholarship potentials, losing titles due to these male athletes. And one of the most heartbreaking stories that I recently heard and was able to get in touch with the girl is she's from Central California. And she plays in CIF. She does cross country and track and field. And she had to go to her school board meeting and speak out it during the public comment, which again, that's during a school night. She should be focused on going to practice, studying for her tests, getting her homework done, hanging out with friends, and then going to school the next day. She had to take time out of her day to go to this school board meeting. And in 2 minutes of the public comment, she had to let him know that there is a male in the female locker room. The worst part, this male comes into the female locker room already dressed out. He's not in there to change. He goes in and he watches the females change. So now these girls are changing in their cars because they don't want to be around this. What girl wants to have a male watching them change? None, absolutely none. And the most heartbreaking part is when she spoke out about this at her school board meeting, she burst into tears, basically begging her school board, why won't you guys protect us? Why won't you guys ask CIF to follow Title IX? Why are we being left with males watching us change in the locker room? Because you're allowing this to happen. And then when the buzzer went off for her 2 minutes being up, she's standing there crying, sharing her story. And one of the female school board members told her, okay, wrap it up. Instead of just thinking, you know what, this young high schooler has been through so much because we aren't urging CIF to do better. We aren't asking the California government to do better. And instead of just giving her the extra 30 seconds or the extra minute, which I doubt anyone on either side would have an issue with as this young female sitting there crying, she said, wrap it up. So these girls are not receiving the help from their school boards, from their teachers. And of course, there are some good ones out there doing great work. But these girls are being affected and especially not receiving help from CIF. Again, one of the girl that texted me and said, "Does this mean I get my first place trophy now?" She was recently just competing in the track and field of CIF this spring. She made it all the way to the state finals. And so that's the top of the top athletes. And each weekend, she had to worry about competing against a male athlete who is taking the top spots in triple, high, and long jump of female athletics. So think about it. That first weekend, there was about 40 girls in each of those categories competing. Of course, some of them were duplicates, but overall, one male was affecting 100 girls in one day. Girls were figuring out for the first time there was a male competing. I was talking to some after saying they started freaking out when they realized they were at risk of coming in 10th instead of making the top 9 to move on to the following weekend because of the male athlete. And so that was one of the events we were really pushing CIF to do better, to fix their policies, to stand for what's right, instead of watching these girls have to share a podium with a male. And so he was continuing to allow to compete all the way up to the very end. And so at that last weekend, it was the state track and field finals. Again, the top of the top female athletics in the state of California. That's who makes it to this. And now this is what they have to worry about. So after being reached out to by multiple of the families to be there, to show support, to let people know about what's happening, I decided to go. I wanted to support these female athletics because I know if I was currently a female athlete and having to endure this, and I felt like my coach, my school board, my CIF, my state government wasn't standing up for me, it would be great to know there was just some community members willing to come and speak out. So I went to this event. I have these little bracelets. I actually have one here that you could probably see. It's a Save Girls Sports bracelet. It's pink. It's pretty simple. And then it says xxonly.org. What this led to at the time, this website, it led to a petition for people to sign urging CIF to follow Title IX, which I know Family Policy Alliance signed it. I know quite a few of you guys that also work there signed it as individuals. So we went to the CIF just to pass these out, to get conversation going, as well as to pass out little half-sheet flyers that said the same thing. Here's the QR code to this website. We need to urge CIF to follow Title IX. It was a great thing. We ended up getting over 20,000 signatures. But when I went to that track meet, I thought, okay, let me bring these in. I went with my backpack. Inside my backpack, I had probably 200 or 300 of these, and I had a bunch of the flyers. CIF did bag checks to go into the event. They checked my bag. They opened it up. When you opened up my bag, what you saw was these and all the flyers. No one said, you can't bring those in. What are you using this for? What's going on? And so I went into the event. All the posters outside said, you can't bring any posters or banners into the event, to which, again, I didn't. I had a half-sheet flyer. And I decided before any of the events in the track and field meet started happening, I was going to go around and have one-on-one conversations with people because I didn't want to distract people from when their child was competing or anything like that. And so I went around and I talked to maybe 10 people max saying, did you know there is a male competing today in the girls category? I would love to give you a bracelet and a flyer. I think there was 1 or 2 people that just kind of nodded their head. So I moved on. Everyone else was very receptive, wanted to have a conversation, and everyone else literally said, can I get a couple more of those bracelets? And so people there weren't okay with what's happening. I think they were glad people were bringing awareness to it. On the outside of the fence, there were people that were on the public sidewalk chanting with megaphones, saying no boys and girls sports and things like that. I'm all for that. Bring attention, bring awareness, stand for it. I wanted to go with the approach that wasn't going to distract from the female athletes competing or take away from them competing because they were already going through enough, which is why I decided to go on the one-on-one option, kind of just be quiet, do my thing, and then just watch the girls and cheer the girls on as they compete. I, again, was in there for about 45 minutes, had to pay for a ticket to get into the event, and talked to maybe 10 people. It's about 105 degrees that day. I go sit down in the shade, kind of just to get some water, recoup before the girls are about to compete, the first event with the boy in the female category. And as I'm sitting there in a little beach chair in the shade, I see two police officers and a CIF member walking towards me. And I was just like, oh, whatever. Didn't really think twice of it. There was a CIF tent not too far from me. But then all of a sudden, they weren't walking like around like the little path anymore. They were coming directly at me. And they walk up to me and they said, are you the girl handing out the little flyers and the bracelets? To which I do have a pink shirt on that says Protect Girls Sports. I have a pink hat on that says women's sports are for females only. So, like, yes, it was very evident where I stood on this. So I responded and said, yes, that's me. Thinking in my head, they were probably, maybe they were going to ask me to stop. And I'd say, okay, that's fine. I'm here to support the girls. If you feel like I can't do this, then I'm going to listen. Instead, after I said, yes, that's me, they said, we need you to immediately leave the event. Completely threw me off guard. And so I said back, why do I need to leave the event? And they said, well, you can't be handing stuff out like that. And I said, can you show me the policy that says you can't hand stuff out like this? Because we've handed stuff out at previous CIF events. And I looked through the policy. I made sure I saw the posters outside that said you can't bring banners or posters in. To which I did have posters in my car and said, I'm going to leave these in my car because I'm going to follow the rules of what it says on the signs outside. And she continued to say, that's our policy. That's our policy. We have a policy. So I said, can you show me that policy? You know, you would think if you were going to come throw someone out of the event, you'd have the policy ready to show them. I asked her what her name and title was. She wouldn't even tell me what her name and title was with CIF. And she said, I can't show you it right now. We're running an event. We're in the middle of running an event. And so she said, I can send it to you later. To which I said, I would like to see it now because I want to make sure you guys don't just add something in later. And she said, I'll just send it to you later. I said, well, let me give you my contact information. To which she said, we already have your contact information, which I don't know how that would have even happened. And then I kept pressuring. And again, if they wanted me to leave, I was going to leave because I wasn't there to create a distraction for the girls. And I kept pressuring. And she kind of slipped up and said, well, this is our rule that we decided today for today's event. And then she then resorted back to, well, there's a policy in place. There's a policy in place. So it was very evident that they just were not happy that I was there. I was standing up for girls. And so they're going to escort in a male athlete to compete against females and protect him and be by his side. But if a former female athlete wants to speak out on the protection of female athletes, they're going to escort me right out. And that's what ended up happening. I said, okay, can we go back out through the front so I can get to my car? I had someone with me. And so they were carrying like chairs and all this stuff. They wouldn't even let me go back out through the front. They put us out on the side of the street through a side gate. I had to walk maybe about a mile and 105 degrees back to my car. And then I was able to go back towards the front of the event because they had a free speech square. So apparently CIF doesn't recognize that we live in America and we have our First Amendment right. And they created a free speech square for people to talk and think about things freely in that square. But once you leave it, you lose your First Amendment right. So it really showed how far that they are willing to go to push this trans ideology and to work against females. And again, it was a female that escorted me out. And it's really disturbing to watch females work towards their own erasure.
Yes, it is. Which, speaking of that, we're going to ask you before you go about a national incident along those regards. But I do want to say, Sophia, I'm so sorry this all happened to you. I mean, that's a terrible thing what happened to you, and it's so antithetical to America's free speech foundations. You know, this is so much more akin to the stories we hear and that we've covered on this show about the buffer zones around abortion facilities in England, for example. Those are other countries. They don't have the First Amendment like we do. So to see this happen, I mean, if they're willing to lose $8 billion in federal funding over this, they're obviously willing to incur whatever might happen from violating your free speech rights. So it doesn't mean it was right. So I'm still sorry that happened to you. When it comes to women pulling the ladder up behind them, essentially, when it comes to women's rights, there has been a national story on this that actually, I think, represents some of the broader, more positive cultural shift on this issue, at least in terms of what constitutes a PR crisis for a public figure. So many of our listeners will know the former University of Kentucky swimmer Riley Gaines has become a great national Save Girls Sports advocate. I think most of our listeners will have probably heard that she was in some kind of social media Twitter spat with a former Olympian, but I'm not sure that many of us know much more of the details. So Sophia, I know you covered this real quickly. before we let you go, could you just tell us what happened and what it means publicly, at least in terms of positive social shifting on this issue?
Absolutely. So we've seen Riley Gaines speaking out on this issue since early 2022. And of course, she's received pushback from people. She's also received a lot of great support from a lot of well known figures. And recently, like as per usual, Riley's been posting stuff about protecting girls' sports. Out of nowhere, a very well known Olympian, I would go as far to say as this is the one Olympian that when you say their name, basically every American knows who she is. So that's not the fact with a lot of Olympians, but she is one of them where everyone knew who she is. Everyone loves watching her. She's a great athlete, and it's Simone Biles. She's an extremely fun athlete to watch. She's been a great Olympian. And out of nowhere, not even in response to a tweet of Riley's, literally out of nowhere, she just went on a rampage against Riley Gaines, basically saying that as long as Riley's around, no one's safe in sports, that she's a transphobe, that she's just pushing harms towards athletes, that she's doing nothing good. And then went as far to say that Riley should stand and fight against people her own size. And she said, ironically, that happens to be a male, which Riley is like 5'5" and this small, tiny, skinny, like built little thing. Like she is muscular like an athlete, but she's not like this. Like it's not like she was a basketball player that we see these female athletes hitting 6 feet, 6'1". She's a tiny little thing. And then it also goes to show that Simone Biles proved our point by saying it happens to be a male. Oh, so males and females are different then, if she's going as far to say it happens to be a male. And so also Simone Biles has done a huge and great job about standing for body positivity in female athletics. I think most people know Simone Biles is pretty short. Most gymnastics are, but she's very muscular, which is why she's able to be such a great athlete. But that's also led to body image issues. And she has stood against shaming women's bodies, female athletics bodies especially. And then she went on to shame Riley's body. It's beyond insane. It's hypocritical. And again, this happened out of nowhere. So Riley responded basically saying, you are pulling the ladder up. You've done so much great work for female athletes, and now you're going to stand against them. Again, think about how many young girls look up to Simone. What a great athlete she is, and what a great Olympian she is. And she just cracks out of nowhere, just goes on this rampage, basically putting female athletics back after all the hard work she's done to prove how great female athletes can be and all that they can achieve. And so she went silent on X for a while, was receiving major pushback on her TikTok account, Instagram posts, X account, and went silent. And after a few days, she gave a pretty sorry example of an apology, stating that she should have never attacked Riley's looks, basically stating that maybe we can look into a third category of sports. It was a very PR written response, but it was really disheartening to see a great female athlete work to erase female athletics. We've seen that with Megan Rapinoe, the soccer player, which Megan Rapinoe, when she was on the U.S. women's national team, they lost to a U15 boys team. And so she should be able to see how much better boys biologically are at sports. So the good part about this is 2 years ago, if Simone Biles tweeted that out, I don't think we would have seen as many people take our side on this. I don't think we would have seen people push so hard against her that it would have led to definitely her having some PR team write this response for her. And so it shows we're at a turning point in California, because I saw Californians push back, but also across the nation, where people went as far to, again, comment on her Instagram posts, comment on her TikTok posts, and ask her why she's doing this. That wouldn't have happened 2 years ago. And so while we still have a great way to go, while we're still closer to protecting female athletics in some states and not in others, we will get there one day. And I think what happened in that situation really shows that the tide is turning and that most Americans agree that males should not be in girls and women's sports.
I think you're really right about that, Sophia. I can remember even beyond 4 years ago, Megan Rapinoe was gifted the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her work in this area. And now fast forward 4 years later, and the PR disaster is in the opposite direction. Now it's a PR disaster to support men and women's sports, which is a measure, as you say, of how the American people have sided definitively, thankfully, with women's rights. And should give a lot of people hope, particularly in California. We wanted to raise awareness of what's going on in California as an outlier compared to this. And you've really helped us and our audience with that. So thank you. Before we let you go, maybe you could just tell us where people can find you and follow you and the work of California Family Council.
Yeah, absolutely. So I post a lot on my X account and my Instagram account about the sports issue specifically. Both of those are Sophia S. Lorey. And then California Family Council, you can find us at californiafamily.org or California Family Council on any social media platforms. Even if you're not from California, I think it's important to follow to see what's happening in California and what can happen in your state if you don't stand for what's right now. And a lot of states, I think, take for granted how good they have it. So it's important to be aware because at California, we had it really good too at one point. And I think a lot of the California citizens didn't recognize that. And that's where it went sideways. So definitely followed along to be aware. I have a little podcast called This Is a Woman podcast. You can follow that on Instagram or watch it on YouTube or any podcast platform where we kind of talk about all these issues surrounding womanhood. But yeah, that's the best places to find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you for this great update, Sophia. Clearly a lot more shoes to drop. Encourage our audience to follow and support Sophia, California Family Council, and the This Is Woman podcast. As you can tell from hearing from her, they're doing excellent, important work. So thank you to everyone for listening to this episode of House to Home, a podcast from Family Policy Alliance Foundation. As always, I'm Joseph Kohm with Grace Youngson. We've had Sophia Lorey from California Family Council on with us today. If you like our show, please feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. Leave us a review. It really helps us. Otherwise, you can find the links we discussed in the show today in our show notes. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you for listening.